Welcome back to Big Boss Biscuits, the podcast where we believe that leaders bring the sweet cookies and also the bitter chocolate. Today we're talking about what happens when leaders are winning and yet falling apart on a personal level. When you snap at someone you deeply care about, and what happens when we apologize. That actually it repairs and builds more trust than when we just let it go and believe that we have to be perfect. Leadership is messy, it's human, and it's a lot of the things that we usually don't see or don't talk about when we are in a leadership position. So to unpack all of this, I'm talking with someone who lives this stuff every day. Kathleen Spearman is the Director of Strategic Growth at Instant Teams, a company that builds customer experience teams with military spouse talent. And here's what I love about Kathleen. She's not just talking about it, she's living it. A military spouse herself and a mother of two, quite often solo parenting while her partner is serving. Before this, Kathleen had years of experience as a social worker, leading crisis teams for LGBTQIA+ and veteran communities. So she knows how to translate empathy into strategy, especially in businesses and team leadership. She gets that belonging and safety are not just nice haves. It's something that drives retention and empowers her team. It builds strategic business excellence. Kathleen calls her work the tiptoe dance between high performance and genuine humanity. So grab your biscuits and let's dive into another real-life leadership lesson. I'm your host, Kirsten Penalosa. Welcome, Kathleen, to Big Boss Biscuits.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. I'm so excited to be here.
Kathleen, you bring such a unique experience and background with you as a military spouse. You have made essentially your career within constant change and you've built resilience. So now watching the show Ted Lasso and seeing him going through all these challenges, how does it mirror your experience and the emotional landscape that you go through as a military spouse?
I wonder if it's why I'm so drawn to the show. When I watch Ted go through these extreme life changes, both with his family and in his career, I resonate so much. If we go back to where I actually began my career, I had every intention of being a licensed clinical psychologist. And then I met this guy, and that's what started the pivot. So when I met my spouse, I knew he was going to be joining the military. He was in ROTC, and I knew that that is the trajectory. If I am choosing this human, I'm choosing this lifestyle. And it's so funny. Something that comes up a lot in military spouse culture is the phrase, well, you knew what you signed up for. Kirsten, I can tell you, none of us knew what we signed up for. Things are just so different. You know, the military takes you into so many different directions. I pivoted to, okay, I don't think a 6-year PhD makes sense if we're moving every 2 to 3 years. So I looked at getting my master's in social work. I could still become a therapist. I could still do the important work around mental health. As it turns out, you need a different clinical license, even when you are a social worker. And so I finished my degree. I thought I had it all figured out. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a therapist. Well, every time we PCS, which is the military term for moving, turns out you can't really take that clinical license with you all the time. So how did I pivot again? Well, I ended up doing program management, ironically, in the customer experience space, but on the mental health side, which was wonderful and also very 24/7. And so there I was again about 2 years ago now, where I wanted to pivot one more time. I say one more time, but we know life is long. And now I have found myself at Instant Teams, where I get to help build customer experience, customer facing teams using military spouse talent. And so I joke with my coworkers all the time. It's still social work. It's macro level social work. It's making an impact in just a way that's different than being a therapist. But watching Ted, watching him move to an entirely different country and to adapt, to be resilient, to still struggle, because even though we are resilient, it doesn't mean that we don't struggle. It's really inspiring.
I love hearing what you said, especially the phrase, you knew what you were signing up for. I heard that when it comes to leadership positions a few times as well. And I'm like, no, no, you never know what you're signing up for. Every team, every company and culture is different. And so you have to adapt a lot. So just by being a military spouse and having experienced that constant change, you have learned skill sets, especially resilience. It's one thing to talk about how to keep yourself together as a leader, how to present yourself, how to show resilience in front of your teams. And then there's the part of, but we're also humans. And so now that you're in a leadership position, how do you go about keeping the humanity at the center while also maybe in your private life there's just so much going on and you may not have it all together?
I immediately think of the word humility, and it's so important to me as a leader to have confident humility. I can be humble and I can say, "Gosh, I don't know," or "Today is a day where the pieces of the puzzle are not coming together for me right now." And my experience as a military spouse, moving from place to place, I've been able to learn that you can solve most problems even if you don't have the answer right now, you will get there and you can lean on your community. I think that's another big piece for being a military spouse. So, what a lot of people don't realize is when you do move from one base to another, especially if you have children, you are finding a new doctor, you're finding new schools, you're finding new everything. And one of the funniest moments is when you realize you have to find an emergency contact. So, gosh, I'm going to add this neighbor that I just met a few weeks ago to be an emergency contact for me. 9 times out of 10, that person becomes someone that I'm very close to. And so, what initially was a problem, scary thing to overcome, I've witnessed time and time again that problems can be solved. And so, as a leader, being confident and being humble, not knowing now, but knowing that I can get there. I can lean on community, lean on coworkers, on the people above me, the people below me, that we can come together solving massive problems, both personal life and in the workplace. So I know that I can be confident and I can also be humble.
You mentioned community and the support system. That's another beautiful thing that Ted does. He leans into his support group. He brings to life the Diamond Dogs, who then also become a support group for, Roy, who is more like the lone wolf. And you're not the first leader who talks about community and the importance of that. How do you encourage, especially emerging leaders, to find a support system? How do you do this with your team members?
Yes, that is a very tricky dynamic, isn't it? Because you spend so much time with people who are your direct reports. And a lot of times, these are people that you begin to really care for. And that can be hard because you do have to have a level of boundary. And, there is an outcome that is necessary. There are KPIs and things that you have to hold people accountable for. I definitely have seen in my leadership finding other communities and finding people who are where I want to go eventually. So finding mentors that are several years, decades in a different place, and they're people I look up to. And I think what can be really cool too is if they're in a different industry even, because, and to your credit for making this podcast and for having people in different leadership roles, leadership, there's going to be similar takeaways even if you're in a different industry. Leading a team is industry agnostic. And so finding other people to lean on to ask questions to. I do like to stack tasks. So exercise is important to me and mentorship is important to me. I will spend time connecting with people that I have a mentorship relationship with, and I will walk my neighborhood. And that is when I am able to both get exercise for my mental health and also getting to share and ask questions and network in a way that can pour into me, pour into that person.
It sounds like you do something that If I were to analyze the Ted Lasso character himself, he doesn't do very well. You, as a leader, you look for a support system, you look for mentors, even outside of the group that you're working with, and seek even more experienced leaders or people around you to get mentorship from. So we have Dr. Sharon coming in to support first Danny and then stays as a team psychologist. She offers Ted multiple times the opportunity to get help and support. He always refuses. I find it one of his failures as a leader. How would you go about being vulnerable and seeking help when you are falling apart?
Oh, goodness. I think this is something that Ted Lasso not having this as a strength is actually a really important part of the plot and important for leaders who watch this show because I don't think he's rare. I don't think that that's rare to be afraid to be vulnerable. And Ted is so good about being there for everybody else. He is so good about being other people's cheerleaders. I remember him talking with Roy after a particularly hard loss, and he's like, "Don't beat yourself up over this." A few moments later, he's beating himself up about things happening in his personal life. And there's a cognitive dissonance there. He's able to be there for everyone and yet so resistant to people being there for him. I have seen this before. And for myself, I have not always done this well, especially in one of my first leadership positions. I definitely viewed it as I have to have it all together. I have to be perfect. Perfectionism, both in the mental health space, we talk about that a lot, but also in leadership. I have to present myself a certain way. And unfortunately, one time this was confirmed, I became emotional in a workspace and that was not perceived well. And so that's really, really hard when you're already nervous to be vulnerable. And then you get that feedback that it's not great. I luckily had at that time surrounded myself with community in my personal life. So I leaned on friends, my family, and other mentors, and they were able to be that mirror saying it's okay to be sad. And in fact, I, through a lot of those conversations, realized that having emotions is actually a huge strength. There's a great book called Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett. He talks about how silly it is that we have to make decisions void of emotion. And what's funny is that no one makes any decision without emotion. We are emotional people. That is what drives us all. And so there is something to be said, especially for Ted, that we're not going to make decisions in really heightened emotions. There are moments where if I'm feeling this way, I'm going to step out. I'm going to take some time for myself. I'm going to lean on my supports. But the reality is that we are all going to feel things. And I think as a leader, it's really important for me to recognize that in my teams so that they don't have that experience where they feel it's not okay to not be a blank slate.
Encouraging vulnerability is such an important aspect of good leadership. As you said, we are all emotional people. It's knowing how to show emotions without oversharing or without bringing your
Right.
team down. But it's also not going into toxic positivity. That's one aspect of the show that I don't like is how Ted often invalidates or goes into that
Mm,
toxic positivity by telling people don't sweat it or be a goldfish. And there's also that we need to make room for those emotions to validate and to encourage emotions in a healthy way at the workplace. Talking about emotions, there's episode 7, Make Rebecca Great Again,
yes.
where Ted doesn't have himself together as he usually does. There's a moment where he snaps at Nate and scoffs at him or lashes out, and then comes back the next day and apologizes. How does this translate to real life leadership when we make that mistake of accidentally hurting someone around us? How do we recover from that in a way that Ted did?
This moment really stood out for me the first time I watched the show, and as one of my actually favorite moments. And it's not a pretty one; it is a challenging one. When I first watched this, I did relate it to parenting. When you mess up, when you make a mistake, when you say something that you shouldn't have, and I'm thinking of it as a military spouse mom and the high stress scenario. There's been times where I've snapped at my kids, and gosh, I'm like, that was not the right way to handle that. What is so powerful is as a leader, as a mother, as a spouse, coming back and apologizing. It is remarkable how many of us forget what it actually means to apologize. That would be hard and awkward. So let's see if we can actually just sweep this under the rug and move forward. And that comes from a fear of emotional hard conversations. But the way that Ted comes back to Nate, he wakes up, he goes to this huge game. It's one of their biggest games. And his priority is to find Nate, pull him aside, and apologize. He states why he's sorry, what he did that was wrong, and asks how he can make it better and how they can move forward. That, as a leader, is so important. That's everything. I have so much more respect when I've seen someone misstep and then come back and say, "Oh gosh, that just wasn't right." If I have said something or snapped in a way that wasn't fair and then I apologize, that's modeling for them. Also, in a leadership perspective, modeling for a team how to take ownership. I'm at my current job at Instant Teams. Ownership is one of our core values. So when somebody makes a mistake or if someone's going to take ownership of a project, you know, you own that. You own the good parts. You can celebrate the good parts, but you also own the parts where you messed up and apologizing and trying to fix that. I hope people can take away just how important the little thing, which is really a big thing, um, making an apology.
Yeah. Apologizing is a step of taking ownership for your mistake. What happens when we take ownership is we build trust.
Yes.
I've seen so many leaders forget about how powerful taking ownership and apologizing is. And it's not just the fact of apologizing, it's the fact that you're acknowledging that you are not perfect, that you did something that wasn't appropriate. You're doing something about it. You're not
Right.
above the other person. And that moment of building trust brings such loyalty to the workspace, to the leadership style. It's a very underrated skill and yet one of the most powerfuls you can bring as a leader.
Absolutely.
When you think about it, the constant changes and adapting, how has this helped you in the current environment that you're in on the work site?
Yes. So to quote Walt Whitman via Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. I think curiosity is a really big part in adapting to change. So right now, a lot of people and leaders are very nervous about AI and all of the technological changes that drastically impact our society, our workplace environment. And how can we get really curious? I do share Ted Lasso's optimism. I'm a very optimistic person. So when I see something about fear mongering over how things are changing too quickly, I get excited and I'm really curious. And I guess I also need to be careful with toxic positivity, as you mentioned. But I think being really curious, digging in, and then encouraging that same curiosity in the teams you lead. And so, something really small that we've been implementing about technology in particular is a highlight of a new tech thing. It can be big, it can be small for all of our teams to engage with. And so, we will highlight a new tool or something even really tiny within the tool and just encourage everybody to play with it for the month. It doesn't even have to necessarily be related to work. What is so great about that is if you get people curious about something not related to work, it's also exercising the parts of their brain that are going to bring creativity to the workplace too. So I definitely encourage people to be curious, not judgmental. It sounds cheesy, but it is. It's such an important part of the show. And I think it's why it's probably one of the most quoted lines from the show as a whole.
I know, so much so that people forget where the line actually comes from originally.
I know. I know. People think it's Ted Lasso.
Coming back to what you said earlier about your background, you wanted to become a psychotherapist. How do you use the experience and the knowledge there to build healthy work environments and teams where they feel they have the liberty to be authentic, to have the freedom to make mistakes, the coaching through your leadership to recover from those mistakes. Tell me more a little bit of how you draw from that experience as a mental health professional.
You know, if everybody had time to get their mental health degree, I think it would actually benefit lots of us. I switched into a different field technically, but the skills that you learn are so important. So, two things stick out for me. Number one is we studied a lot about a strengths based perspective. So, in my master's program, that was something that came up a lot. And one thing I will never forget is that the person you're speaking to is the ultimate expert on themselves. They are the ones that know themselves best. A lot of times we want to give the answers. We want to say, okay, you're going through this. I mean, we can take Ted Lasso. You are having panic attacks. Here's how you fix panic attacks. You want to say you're experiencing depression. Well, here, I'm such an expert. Here's how you fix depression. And what you lack when you go to problem solving mode immediately is that there's a lot more to that person's inner experience, more history, more nuance to what that person has gone through. And knowing that they have the expertise on who they are is where we become less educators and more empowerment leaders. I want to empower the person to draw on their strengths. I have had some incredible bosses in my life who have done a great job at doing that, at seeing my strengths and then pulling me even more towards those strengths. And that is an investment in the human first, which also turns into an investment in that company. And I'm living that right now. My boss had to take a chance on me to go into a different field. And she really did a great job at saying, you're the expert on your skills and where your strengths lie. I'm going to provide you an environment where those strengths can compound on each other. And so I try to do that as well. And I hope that over, the next however many years of my career that I will pay that back and find the strengths and encourage the strengths for how this person can develop. And then, of course, this is business too, right? We care about the human being, but also when we invest in their strengths, you are going to have so much better outcomes. You are going to have an employee that is loyal. And a lot of military spouses, when they are invested in, when somebody takes a chance on them, even if their resume looks a little weird, even if they had to take a gap year because of a deployment that they were navigating, when a company invests in that person, they are going to be your most loyal employee 10 times out of 10. And it's a beautiful thing to see.
You can't imagine how excited I am. I've been holding back my excitement and to not talk over you because I've been shouting this from the roofs that human-centered leadership, which is exactly all you just said, investing in the person, looking at their strengths, amplifying those, and then helping them to develop them further or develop new strengths. It's a business strategy. It's not a
Yes.
woo-woo talk. I've been in the companies where they don't see that. They just think about the outcomes, the money, the expenses or churn numbers and metrics,
Right.
and forgetting that there's an entire staff behind every single move in the company. They neglect that. And then guess what? You see employee churn, lack of loyalty, low morale, the right leadership. That's truly investing in your people. So I'm so glad that there are leaders like you who think human centered, who are focused on developing the people, because you understand that when you do that, you have an like amazing business outcome and your business is successful. You mentioned parenting, and it reminds me of one other aspect of leadership. I do believe that parenting is very much leadership. You are the leader for your children. You are accountable for the children in the same way that you're accountable for your team's outcomes and how they are. And so trying to connect the dots. You talked about your parenting, then you talked about investing in military spouses, but it's also investing in mothers. Quite often we see in workspaces still the discrimination towards mothers who have, similarly to a military spouse, gaps in their resume, or they took some years off to take care of children. But what happens when we take a bet on them and we support them and we bring them back into leadership? So how do you connect all the dots of all this amazing experience and vast, diverse background that you bring to be an excellent leader.
Yes, I'm so glad that you bring up, motherhood in the workplace. It can be so hard, right? Because you're leading in your home and then you're leading at your job, and we can forget to also be there for ourselves. So I think, when you talked about tying everything together, it reminds me of, again, the strengths-based therapy lens. You should also be strengths-based towards yourself too. And it's easy for me to say, I'm now 2 years out from my last really big pivot. There were times I did not view myself as strength based. There were times that I was laying on the couch just so confused on how am I going to make a pivot? How am I going to build a career for myself in a different industry? It was that we're moving and we're having to make all these big changes for the military life, and how am I going to do this? And at the time, I could use a lot of negative self-talk, like, oh, I failed, or I'm just not good enough to navigate this pivot. And again, building community, having people that were able to sometimes aggressively pull me out of that space and say, how could you say these things about yourself? Would you say these things to another military spouse? That was one of the best questions somebody asked me quite aggressively, and I needed it. Would you say this to someone else? And it snapped me into, oh my gosh, no. I will look at now all the things I have overcome over the past 8 years of building that career after my master's, and being able to point out my own strengths to myself. It really needs to come from within. It needs to be intrinsic, that I believe I can be confident, I can overcome this shift, whether it's as a mother, as a leader, as an employee, as a team member. When you can find your strengths and also speak them to yourself, that is going to make you a better. And so it's finding the strength within, using the community around me to do that, and now paying it forward. And I think that this really is what Ted Lasso tries to do, right? Eventually, he does start to look at himself not with blind optimism, but with true understanding of what he's overcome, even if it's messy. He is pivoting, he is building something new, and he has learned things from those really hard moments. And I think it's a powerful takeaway, both from a military spouse experience, but also from this wonderful show that has so many lessons in it.
Kathleen, it was such a beautiful moment talking with you about those meaningful aspects of leadership based on your experience as a military spouse, the resilience that you build, the lessons you have, and that made you this amazing leader you are today, where you take care of your people because not only do you believe in them, but also because you understand that investing in them is a win-win situation for everybody.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathleen, for being here today, and everybody who tuned in for our 5th episode of Big Boss Biscuits. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe or follow, share with your network, and connect with us. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Kathleen Spearman or Kirsten Penalosa. You can also connect with us on Instagram at kirsten.penalosa. Until next time.